Here's a question that sounds simple right up until you actually think about it. Humans lost most of their body hair somewhere between 1 and 2 million years ago. The evolutionary pressure for this was real and well documented. Bipedal hominins running long distances under the African sun needed a cooling system, and a body covered in thick fur is a terrible cooling system. So the hair went, mostly. The eccrine sweat glands distributed across the skin surface expanded dramatically. The fur retreated, and the result was a naked ape capable of sustained high-intensity activity in conditions that would overheat virtually every other large mammal on the savanna. Fine, that makes sense. But then, specifically on the lower half of the male face, the hair stayed. Not just stayed, it stayed in a form that is coarser, denser, more visually prominent, and more distinctly sex-differentiated than the body hair it largely replaced. In a species that spent most of its evolutionary history progressively reducing its hair covering, the male beard is a conspicuous holdout, a patch of thick, fast-growing, androgen-dependent facial hair that sits on a face that is otherwise relatively hairless, on a body that is otherwise relatively hairless, and has been culturally present across every human society in recorded history. Why? Not why do some men have beards? That question has an obvious answer involving genetics and testosterone, but why did evolution produce a sex-specific, androgen-driven, highly visible patch of facial hair in a lineage that was simultaneously under selection to reduce hair coverage elsewhere? What purpose does the beard serve that was worth keeping it when the fur was being shed? And why specifically the face? Why specifically males? The honest answer involves several competing theories, none of which is complete on its own, all of which illuminate something interesting about sexual selection, human social dynamics, threat display, and the strange biology of a species that simultaneously shaves and celebrates facial hair with an intensity that suggests something important is going on beneath the surface. Start with the evolutionary baseline, because the beard doesn't make sense without understanding what the human hair reduction story actually involved. The reduction of body hair in the human lineage was not a sudden event. It occurred gradually over a long period, driven by selection pressure related to thermoregulation in bipedal, long-distance running hominins. The evidence that this was a thermoregulatory adaptation, rather than something else, comes from several converging lines. The concurrent dramatic increase in eccrine sweat gland density, the retention of hair specifically in locations where it serves functions other than thermoregulation, scalp hair for solar protection, axillary, and pubic hair possibly for pheromone dispersal and friction reduction, and the pattern of loss that removed hair most extensively from the torso and limbs, the areas most involved in heat generation and dissipation during sustained locomotion. The scalp is interesting as a comparison case. Head hair was retained, and in many populations increased in length over evolutionary time, which makes thermoregulatory sense. The scalp is the part of the body most directly exposed to solar radiation in a bipedal animal, and hair provides insulation against direct solar heating that actually helps maintain a lower head temperature than bare scalp would achieve. Scalp hair reduction serves thermoregulation. Scalp hair retention also serves thermoregulation. These are consistent. The beard is not consistent with this simple thermoregulatory logic. The face is exposed to solar radiation, but the beard does not cover the face in a way that would meaningfully reduce solar heat load. It covers the jaw and lower cheeks, areas that are not particularly vulnerable to solar overheating and that would not benefit significantly from insolation in a hot climate. Thermoregulation does not explain the beard. What makes the beard biologically distinctive, beyond its location, is its hormonal dependence. Beard growth is driven by androgens, specifically dihydrotestosterone, a potent androgen derived from testosterone, and begins at puberty when androgen levels rise dramatically in males. The beard follicles are androgen sensitive in a way that scalp follicles are often anti-sensitive. The same hormones that drive beard growth in many men contribute to male pattern baldness by causing miniaturization of scalp follicles. This paradox, androgens growing hair in one location and removing it in another, is biologically real and indicates that the two hair systems are under separate genetic and hormonal control rather than being simple components of a single hair maintenance system. The androgen dependence of beard growth immediately places the beard in a different evolutionary category from scalp hair or body hair. Androgen-dependent traits that appear at puberty and are specific to one sex are, almost by definition, candidates for being sexually selected traits, characteristics shaped not by environmental pressure on survival but by preference or competition within the reproductive system. The conceptual framework of sexual selection immediately becomes relevant. Sexual selection operates through two distinct mechanisms that Charles Darwin distinguished and that remain fundamental to understanding sexually dimorphic traits. The first is intersexual selection, or mate choice, where a trait evolves because one sex, typically females in most species with stronger sexual dimorphism, preferentially chooses mates who display it, causing the trait to become more pronounced in the sex being selected over evolutionary time. The second is intrasexual selection, or male-male competition, where a trait evolves because it provides an advantage in competition with rivals of the same sex, either through direct combat or through threat display that discourages rivals from initiating competition. Both mechanisms are plausible drivers of beard evolution, and the evidence suggests both may have contributed, which is part of why the beard story is more complex than it appears. The intrasexual selection hypothesis, that beards evolved as threat display signals in male-male competition, has some compelling support. Facial hair is visually prominent, and it has specific effects on the perceived attributes of the face that wear it. Studies examining how beard presence affects attributions of dominance, aggression, social status, and age consistently find that bearded male faces are judged as more dominant, older, and of higher social status than the same faces clean-shaven. These attributions are consistent across a range of cultural backgrounds, suggesting they tap into relatively universal responses to facial appearance, rather than being purely culturally constructed. If bearded faces are consistently perceived as more dominant and socially formidable, and if this perception has been consistent across human evolutionary history, then a male with a full beard would have had an advantage in the pre-conflict assessment phase of male-male competition, the visual dominance signaling that occurs before physical confrontation, and that in many species determines whether confrontation occurs at all. A would-be challenger assessing a bearded male and perceiving greater dominance than the challenger's own signals project would be more likely to withdraw before initiating physical competition, saving the bearded male from costly confrontation. The jaw-framing function of the beard is particularly relevant to this threat display interpretation. Human jaws are among the most visually assessed anatomical features in face perception research. Jaw width and prominence are associated with perceived dominance and formidability across multiple studies, and the visual prominence of the jaw is amplified by beard growth. A beard effectively enlarges the apparent size of the lower face and jaw, creating a visual impression of facial robusticity that exceeds what the underlying skeletal structure provides. The beard is making the male face look physically more formidable than the skull beneath it actually is. This is analogous to the threat display function identified in other species' secondary sexual characteristics. The mane of a male lion has been studied as a signal of condition and formidability. Darker, fuller manes are associated with testosterone levels, age, and fighting success, and rival males assess mane characteristics in determining whether to initiate confrontation. The beard may serve an analogous function in human-male competition, a visible signal of testosterone influence, condition, and maturity that rivals assess before deciding whether to initiate competition. The size extension aspect of beard display fits a broader pattern in primate threat display. Many primate species have facial features or hair arrangements that make the face appear larger, wider, or more formidable during threat display. The cheek flanges of male orangutans, the dramatic facial hair patterns of mandrills, the pronounced brow ridges of various primates that create a visual impression of facial heaviness. Beards in this context look less like a random holdout from human fur shedding, and more like part of a broader primate toolkit for facial threat signaling in male-male competition. The intersexual selection angle, beards as signals to females during mate choice, has more complicated evidence. Studies measuring female preferences for bearded versus clean-shaven male faces have produced inconsistent results that vary significantly by the study design, the population studied, and the specific beard style evaluated. Some studies find that heavily bearded faces are preferred for long-term relationships, while lighter stubble is preferred for short-term relationships, suggesting that beard-related preferences may be context-dependent rather than universal. Other studies find population-level variation in beard preferences that correlates with cultural exposure and other factors. One particularly interesting line of research involves the concept of frequency-dependent selection, the idea that the attractiveness of a trait varies with how common it is in the population. Studies presenting women with male faces varying in beard prevalence have found that bearded faces are rated more attractive when they are rare in the stimulus set, and less attractive when they are common. Clean-shaven faces show the reverse pattern. This finding, if robust, would suggest that beard attractiveness is not a fixed signal value but a relative one. Beards are attractive when most men are clean-shaven, and less attractive when most men are bearded. Frequency-dependent selection could help explain some of the cultural and temporal variation in beard preferences and beard fashion across human history. By the way, If you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. If beard attractiveness is frequency dependent, then as beard prevalence changes, as more or fewer men in a given cultural context wear beards, the attractiveness signal value changes with it, which would predict exactly the cyclical fashion patterns around beards that are observable in historical records. Beards are fashionable, become extremely common, lose attractiveness value as they become common, fall out of fashion, become rare, and become attractive again as their rarity increases. The honest assessment of the intersexual selection hypothesis is that it probably contributes to beard evolution and maintenance, but is probably not the dominant explanation, given the inconsistency of female preferences across contexts and the stronger consistency of the dominance signaling effects that support the intrasexual selection interpretation. The pathogen resistance hypothesis offers a different kind of explanation that operates at a more physiological level. The face is constantly exposed to environmental pathogens, particles, and contact with various surfaces. Beard hair in the region of the mouth creates a physical barrier to some forms of contact contamination and might, under some ecological conditions, have reduced exposure to certain pathogenic risks. The density of beard hair also creates a microenvironment on the skin beneath it that differs in temperature and humidity from exposed skin, which could influence the local microbiome in ways that affect vulnerability to certain skin infections. This hypothesis is harder to test than the signaling hypotheses and has less direct empirical support, but it provides a plausible mechanism for some survival value in beard retention that could complement the sexual selection explanation rather than competing with it. Evolutionary traits typically serve multiple functions simultaneously, and a beard that signals dominance while also providing some degree of pathogenic protection would be doubly selected for. The chin cushioning hypothesis is perhaps the most specific and least intuitively obvious of the beard evolution theories, and it comes from biomechanical analysis of what happens to the face during physical impact. The human chin is an anatomical structure unique among primates, a forward projection of the lower jaw that has no clear equivalent in our closest relatives. The evolutionary function of the chin is debated, with proposals including enhanced jaw strength for improved dietary processing and bite force, a byproduct of changes in jaw proportions during hominin evolution, and a structural reinforcement for the jaw against impact. If the chin and mandible are structurally important in resisting the forces of facial impact during combat, then tissue covering the chin and jaw, including beard hair and the underlying muscle and fat, could serve a protective cushioning function analogous to the padding in protective headgear. Experimental testing of this hypothesis examined whether bearded jaws dissipate more impact force than clean-shaven jaws using mechanical models. The results suggested that beard hair and underlying tissue do attenuate impact force measurably compared to bare skin, not enormously, detectably. In the context of repeated low-level impacts during physical competition, accumulated trauma reduction could be meaningful over a lifetime of male-male physical competition, providing direct survival and reproductive benefit. If this hypothesis holds, the beard is part of a protective structural system for male faces during physical competition, complementing the threat display function by also providing some physical protection when the threat display fails to prevent confrontation. The beard simultaneously signals formidability and provides some protection against the consequences of challenges to that formidability. Now address something that the evolutionary arguments sometimes obscure: the extraordinary cultural elaboration of beards across human history, which speaks to the role of beards in human social and symbolic systems that go well beyond the biology. Every documented human civilization has had cultural practices around male facial hair, traditions specifying how beards should be worn, what they signify when they should be modified, and what their presence or absence communicates about the wearer's social status, religious commitment, cultural identity, and personal philosophy. This universal cultural elaboration is itself evidence that the beard is biologically meaningful enough to require social management. Its natural variation creates social signal variation that cultures regulate through norms and practices. Ancient Egyptian pharaohs wore false beards, ceremonial metal beard extensions attached to the chin, as symbols of divine authority. Even female pharaohs like Hatshepsut, who were depicted wearing ceremonial beards in official contexts. The beard, as a symbol of authority and power, was so culturally entrenched that it was performed even by individuals who did not grow beards naturally, because the symbolic communication value of the beard signified something that transcended individual biology. In ancient Mesopotamia, elaborate beard care and styling were associated with high social status. Assyrian and Babylonian depictions of kings and gods show highly styled, oiled beards that represented significant investment in appearance, communicating the resources, status, and grooming access of the wearer. A man who could afford extensive beard care was a man with the resources and social position to prioritize appearance. The beard care was an honest signal of status because it required genuine resource expenditure. The ancient Greek philosophical tradition produced a specific association between the beard and wisdom, intellectual authority, and philosophical identity. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. The visual iconography of Greek philosophy is bearded, and the beard became a cultural marker of philosophical practice to the degree that later Roman philosophical followers of Greek schools adopted beards as identity markers, even as Roman military culture trended toward clean-shaven aesthetics. The tension between Roman military clean-shaven tradition and Greek-influenced philosophical beard tradition produced an interesting historical record of beard politics in the Roman Empire. Several emperors who cultivated philosophical associations, most notably Hadrian, who adopted a distinctive philosophical beard, shifted the dominant aesthetic in a bearded direction, while emperors associated with military tradition maintained cleaner-shaven appearances. The beard was doing political and philosophical work through visual signal that went well beyond whatever biological function drove its initial evolution. Religious traditions across cultures have invested beard practices with theological significance. The prohibition on cutting beard hair in Leviticus maintained an observant Jewish male practice through the present day. The beard as a marker of Muslim male identity based on prophetic tradition maintained across enormously diverse cultural contexts. The varying beard practices of different Christian monastic traditions, the long beard of Sikh male identity maintained as one of the 5 articles of faith. In each of these traditions, the biological signal value of the beard has been incorporated into a theological and cultural system that assigns explicit meaning to its presence and absence, transforming a biological secondary sexual characteristic into a symbol of religious commitment and identity. This religious and cultural amplification of beard significance suggests something interesting about the relationship between biological signaling and cultural meaning-making. The beard was biologically meaningful enough, consistently associated with dominance, maturity, authority, that cultures across the world independently incorporated it into their meaning systems, using it as a canvas for social and spiritual communication. The biology created the signal channel, and cultures loaded it with additional content. The modern beard experience reflects this accumulated biological and cultural weight. Men who grow beards in contemporary contexts are navigating a signal landscape shaped by millions of years of sexual selection, hundreds of thousands of years of male competition in which beard display was meaningful, and thousands of years of cultural elaboration that has associated beards with philosophical authority, religious commitment, masculine identity, counterculture, and, cyclically, fashion. The consistent research finding that bearded faces are perceived as more dominant, older, and of higher social status across diverse cultural contexts suggests that whatever cultural variation exists in explicit beard preferences, the underlying biological signal remains legible across cultures in ways consistent with its evolutionary history. The clean-shaven man and the bearded man are sending different social signals, and the signals are being received and processed in ways that influence how each is perceived and treated, whether or not anyone is consciously aware of the processing. The biology works on perception in ways that precede and partly underlie the cultural responses to beard presence are so consistent in their direction even when they vary in their specific content. The human male beard is, in the end, a biological holdout that survived the fur reduction not by accident, but because it was serving functions worth keeping. Functions in male competition signaling, in female mate assessment, possibly in physical protection during combat, possibly in pathogen management, certainly in cultural meaning-making that amplified and elaborated its natural signal value across all of recorded human history. It is worth noting, without excessive drama but with appropriate wonder, that the same androgen-dependent signaling system that produces beard growth is the system that was elaborated by evolution specifically in the context of male-male competition in a social primate lineage. The beard is, in miniature, a story about how human social life has been shaped by the same selective forces that shaped the faces doing the social living. The fur went because running hot across an African savanna demanded it. The beard stayed because competing with other men, attracting mates, and and navigating the complex social hierarchies of human life turned out to need it. Evolution, as always, was not being sentimental. It was being practical, and the practical decision was to keep the beard.